She was divorced and given $1, but that single bill led her to something no one else could see. The dollar sat alone on the polished table, too clean to be ordinary, too deliberate to be an insult. Evelyn didn't react the way they expected. No anger, no tears, just a quiet pause, as if she had noticed something no one else in the room had. Hours later, that same dollar would take her miles away, past roads she barely remembered, toward a place her ex-husband never once mentioned. If you were handed just $1 after everything you gave, would you walk away or look closer? The alarm didn't ring anymore. Evelyn Mercer woke on her own, the same way she had for months now, just before dawn, when the world was still undecided between night and morning. The room was dim, the thin curtains holding back a gray light that never quite felt like sunrise. She lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling. There was a faint crack running from one corner to the other, like a line drawn by someone who had started something and never finished it. She had meant to fix it when she first moved in. That had been, she wasn't sure exactly how long ago now. Time had a way of flattening when the days all looked the same. After a while, she pushed herself up slowly, careful with her knees. The floor was cold. It always was. The duplex sat at the far edge of town, where the paved roads gave way to patches of gravel and the houses leaned a little more than they should. It had once been part of a neighborhood built for steelworkers, back when the mills still ran day and night, when the air carried heat and purpose instead of rust and silence. Now the mill was gone. What remained were empty lots, shuttered storefronts, and the long, low sound of freight trains passing through without stopping. Evelyn crossed the narrow hallway into the kitchen. The light above the sink flickered once before settling. She didn't bother with the switch anymore. It did that every morning. On the counter sat yesterday's coffee in a chipped mug. She picked it up, turned it once in her hand, then poured it into a small saucepan. The burner clicked twice before catching. A faint blue flame appeared. She stood there while it warmed. No music, no radio. Just the low hum of the refrigerator, and somewhere in the distance, the slow, dragging rhythm of a train moving along old tracks. When the coffee was warm enough, she poured it back into the mug and carried it to the small table by the window. The window looked out onto the side of another building. Brick, faded, close enough that she could see where the mortar had begun to crumble. There wasn't much of a view. She sat down anyway. The bills were where she had left them, a small stack, neatly arranged beside the sugar jar. She had sorted them 2 nights ago, electric, water, the credit card she'd opened last winter when the heating bill ran higher than expected. She didn't touch them. Instead, she wrapped both hands around the mug and took a slow sip. The coffee was bitter. It always was. She drank it anyway. Outside, a truck rattled past, its engine louder than it needed to be. The sound lingered, then faded into the distance. For a few seconds, everything went quiet again. Evelyn leaned back slightly in her chair. There had been a time, she could still picture it clearly, when her mornings began differently. Not with silence, but with movement. Phones ringing, papers spread across a table, numbers being checked, rechecked, decisions made before the day had even properly started. She had been good at that. Better than most people realized. But that was another life, one that didn't belong to this kitchen, or this narrow table, or this view of a brick wall that never changed. She finished the coffee and stood, rinsing the mug without thinking. The faucet dripped once after she turned it off. Then again. She didn't fix that either. Her coat hung by the door, already worn at the cuffs. She slipped it on, checked her pockets, keys, a few folded bills, nothing else, and stepped outside. The morning air was sharp. It carried the faint smell of metal and damp earth, the kind that settled into your clothes if you stood in it too long. The warehouse was a 20-minute walk. Evelyn didn't mind the distance. It gave her something to do before the day officially began. She passed the same buildings every morning. The boarded-up diner on the corner, the old hardware store with its dusty windows, the parking lot that was always half empty no matter the time. People she recognized nodded when they saw her. She nodded back. No one stopped to talk. At the warehouse, the lights were already on. Inside, the air was dry and smelled faintly of cardboard and machine oil. Rows of metal shelves stretched out under fluorescent lights that buzzed quietly overhead. Boxes were stacked in careful lines, each labeled, numbered, waiting to be moved somewhere else. Evelyn hung her coat on the back of a chair and took her place at the long table near the center. There was a rhythm to the work. Pick up a box, check the number, write it down, apply the label, move it to the next pile, repeat. No surprises, no decisions, no room for mistakes, but also no real consequences if something went wrong. Someone else would catch it eventually. She worked steadily, her movements precise, almost automatic. A younger man across from her fumbled with a stack of labels, dropping a few onto the floor. He muttered something under his breath. Evelyn glanced over, then looked back at her own hands. She didn't offer help. Not because she couldn't, because it wasn't expected. The hours passed quietly. A break at 10, another at noon. A short conversation about the weather that went nowhere and ended quickly. By the time her shift ended, the light outside had changed. The gray of morning had softened into something a little warmer, though it didn't last long this time of year. Evelyn walked back the same way she had come. The same buildings, the same silence, the same distant sound of trains moving through a town they no longer needed. When she reached the duplex, she paused for a moment at the door. Just a second. Then she went inside. The kitchen looked exactly as she had left it. The bills still on the table. The faint drip from the sink. The narrow window holding the same unchanging view. Evelyn took off her coat and set it on the chair. She didn't sigh, didn't complain, didn't think of what might have been or what should have been different. She simply moved through the space the way she always did now, quietly, carefully, as if making sure not to disturb anything that might break if handled too roughly. Everything in her life still worked, just less. And that, more than anything else, was what remained. A life that had narrowed piece by piece until it fit inside these walls without resistance. Evelyn Mercer stood in the middle of her kitchen, listening to the soft, steady drip of the faucet, and for a moment, she did nothing at all. Then she turned, reached for a dish towel, and tightened the faucet just a little more than usual. The drip stopped. It wouldn't last. It never did. She dried her hands slowly, folding the towel once before placing it back over the oven handle. The movement was careful, practiced, the kind of habit that stayed when everything else had been stripped away. Her eyes drifted, not to the bills this time, but to a small wooden box tucked near the corner of the counter. It wasn't locked. It didn't need to be. There was nothing in this place anyone would bother stealing. She opened it. Inside were papers, older ones. Not bills, not notices. These were different. Edges slightly curled, ink faded in places. She hadn't looked at them in weeks. Maybe longer. She lifted the top folder and brought it to the table, sitting down in the same chair where she had been that morning. The kitchen light hummed faintly above her. The first page was a ledger. Her handwriting. Neat, precise. Every number aligned, every column balanced. She had always taken pride in that. Not because anyone had told her to, but because numbers, when handled properly, told the truth. She ran her finger along one of the columns. There had been a time when this table, no, not this one, but another, larger one, had been covered in pages like these. Receipts, projections, contracts, late nights that stretched into early mornings, coffee that went cold because neither of them had time to notice. Victor used to pace while she worked. Back and forth across the room, phone pressed to his ear, voice sharp, confident, selling something, convincing someone, making promises. And she made sure those promises could hold. She remembered one night in particular. The heat had gone out in their first office, a narrow space above a print shop that smelled constantly of ink and dust. She had worn her coat indoors, fingers stiff from the cold, calculator tapping against the table as she reworked a set of numbers Victor had brought in that afternoon. "They won't go for it," he had said, standing over her shoulder. "They will," she replied without looking up. "They'll see the risk. They'll see what I show them." She had stayed up until nearly 3 a.m, adjusting projections, shifting timelines, restructuring the debt load until it looked less like a gamble and more like a plan. The next day, Victor walked into the meeting with a folder she had built from scratch. He came home smiling. "They signed," he said, dropping his keys on the counter like it was nothing. She had smiled too. Not wide, not dramatic, just enough. That was how it worked then. He moved forward. She made sure the ground held beneath him. Evelyn closed the ledger and set it aside. Another document lay beneath it. This one newer, cleaner, printed on heavier paper. She didn't need to read the title. She knew what it was. The divorce agreement. She had kept it, not out of attachment, out of habit. She pulled it closer. The language was dense, tight, written in a way that made everything feel final before you even reached the end of a sentence. She remembered sitting across from the lawyer, Victor's lawyer, while her own sat beside her, flipping pages too quickly, too distracted, too tired to fight every clause that passed between them. "There's nothing unusual here," her lawyer had said at one point, adjusting his glasses. "Standard protections, given the size of the business." Evelyn had nodded. She had trusted him to tell her if something mattered. Or maybe she had simply not had the strength to ask the right questions. Victor had been quiet that day. Not cold, not angry. Just decided. Like he had already moved past the conversation they were still having. She turned the page. There it was. A single line, buried between paragraphs of legal phrasing. A clause tied to a document she had signed years earlier. A prenuptial agreement she barely remembered agreeing to. Something Victor had brought to her one afternoon, early on, when everything still felt temporary and promising. "It's just in case," he had said, sliding it across the table. "For the investors. They like things clean." She had skimmed it, asked a question or two, nothing serious. She had signed it. Back then, there hadn't been much to protect. Back then, they had been building something together. Evelyn exhaled slowly. The clause was clear now, in a way it hadn't been before. In the event of dissolution, all primary assets, holdings, and future claims tied to Mercer Logistics would remain under Victor Mercer's sole ownership. No contest, no extension, no share. And at the very end, a settlement amount. Fixed. Final. $1. She stared at the line for a long time. Not in shock. That had passed years ago, though it hadn't come all at once. It had settled slowly, like dust after something heavy collapses. Piece by piece, realization had replaced assumption. She hadn't been pushed out at the end. She had been written out from the beginning. Evelyn folded the document carefully and placed it back into the box. Her movements were steady. No hesitation. No sudden shift in expression. Just the quiet acknowledgement of something she had already lived through. She closed the lid. Outside, the light had dimmed, the sky turning a dull shade of blue-gray that came just before evening settled in. She stood and moved toward the sink, rinsing her hands again, though there was nothing on them. The faucet held this time. No drip. For now. She dried her hands and glanced once more at the table, at the box, at the place where the papers rested. Then she turned away. There was nothing in that box that changed her life anymore. Only records of how it had been taken, quietly, efficiently, without the kind of noise that would have given her something to push back against. Evelyn walked into the living room, the floor creaking softly beneath her steps, and reached for the lamp beside the chair. The light came on, warm but dim. She sat down. Not to think, not to remember, just to be still. And for a while that was enough. The light from the lamp settled into the corners of the room, soft and steady. Evelyn sat without moving, her hand resting loosely in her lap, her eyes unfocused. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It was familiar. After some time, she leaned forward and switched the lamp off. The room fell into shadow. She went to bed early that night, not because she was tired, but because there wasn't much else to do. Sleep came the way it usually did, slow at first, then all at once. Morning returned the same way it always did. Gray light, cold floor, the faint smell of old coffee. Evelyn moved through her routine without thinking. The saucepan, the burner, the mug, the same narrow window, the same stack of bills, untouched. Outside, a train passed earlier than usual, its long horn echoing through the still air. She paused for a second, listening, then finished her coffee and put on her coat. The warehouse felt colder that morning. Not in temperature, but in the way the space held sound. Conversations seemed shorter, movements sharper, the hum of the overhead lights more noticeable. Evelyn took her place at the table. Boxes, labels, numbers. Her hands moved with the same quiet precision. Check, write, apply, move. At some point, the supervisor walked by, clipboard tucked under his arm. He stopped briefly near her station. "Phone call came in earlier," he said, glancing down at the paper. "They said they'd try again." Evelyn looked up. "For me, that's what they said." He shrugged, already turning away. Didn't leave much else. She nodded once. "All right," she said, and went back to work. It wasn't unusual for someone to call. Sometimes it was a mistake. Sometimes it was a company trying to collect on something she hadn't answered. Sometimes it was nothing at all. She didn't think much of it. Not then. The call came just after noon. The warehouse phone rang once, then again, louder the second time. Someone near the front picked it up, spoke briefly, then turned and looked across the room. "Evelyn," he called out, "it's for you." She set down the label she was holding and wiped her hands on the side of her coat before walking over. The receiver felt heavier than she expected. "Hello?" There was a pause on the other end, then a man's voice. Ms. Mercer? It was calm, even, the kind of voice that didn't rush or fill space unnecessarily. Yes. My name is Aaron Delaney. I'm an attorney calling from Chicago. I apologize for reaching you at work, but I was informed this was the most reliable number available. Evelyn leaned slightly against the wall beside the phone. What is this regarding? Another pause. Not hesitation. More like a measured step between thoughts. I'm calling in connection with the estate of Victor Mercer. The name settled into the space between them. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. Around her, the warehouse continued, boxes shifting, footsteps moving, someone laughing briefly at something she couldn't hear, the normal rhythm of the day, unchanged. Mr. Mercer passed away 2 days ago, the man continued. Evelyn blinked once. She didn't ask how, didn't ask where. She simply stood there, holding the receiver, her fingers resting lightly along its edge. I see, she said. Her voice was steady. There will be a formal reading of the will this Thursday morning at our office. Your presence has been requested. Evelyn looked down at the concrete floor beneath her feet. A thin crack ran across it, filled with dust and something darker she didn't try to identify. Why would I be there? She asked. There was no sharpness in the question, just a quiet, practical need for clarity. I'm not at liberty to discuss specific details over the phone, Delaney said. However, your name appears in the document. Evelyn let that sit for a moment. Her name. It didn't mean much on its own. Documents had a way of including names for reasons that didn't always matter. I live in Pennsylvania, she said. I understand, he replied. If travel is a concern, arrangements can be discussed, but I would strongly recommend your attendance. Strongly recommend. The phrase hung there, formal and deliberate. Evelyn shifted her weight slightly, her shoulder brushing against the wall. Is this something that requires a decision? She asked. In a sense, Delaney said. Yes. She glanced toward the open space of the warehouse. Someone had taken her place at the table temporarily, stacking the boxes she hadn't finished. The day was still moving forward, unchanged. I'll think about it, she said. Of course, he replied. I'll have my office send you the details. If you choose to attend, we'll be expecting you Thursday at 10. There was a brief silence. Then, my condolences, Ms. Mercer. Evelyn closed her eyes for just a second. Thank you, she said. She placed the receiver back onto the hook with a soft click. For a moment, she stayed where she was, her hand still resting near the phone. Victor Mercer was dead. The words didn't carry weight the way they might have once. They didn't echo, didn't shift anything inside her. They simply existed. A fact. No more, no less. She turned and walked back to her station. The boxes were where she had left them, the labels neatly stacked. She picked one up, checked the number, wrote it down, and pressed the label into place. Her hands didn't tremble. Her breathing didn't change. But something, small, almost unnoticeable, had shifted. Not grief. Not relief. Something closer to awareness. As if a door she had stopped thinking about had quietly opened somewhere behind her, and she could feel the air moving through it, even if she hadn't turned to look. The rest of the shift passed the same as the hours before. Work completed, table cleared, coat retrieved. Outside, the sky had darkened earlier than expected. Clouds gathering low and heavy, pressing down on the town, Evelyn began the walk home. Halfway there, she slowed slightly, her steps shortening as she passed the boarded-up diner on the corner. Thursday. Chicago. She tried to picture it. The office. The people. The room where something would be read aloud that had already been decided without her. She stopped walking, just for a second. The wind moved through the street, carrying the faint scent of rain. Evelyn looked ahead, then down at the ground, then back toward the road she had come from. There was no expectation, no hope, only a quiet, unfinished feeling. She resumed walking. By the time she reached the duplex, the first drops had begun to fall. Inside, the kitchen looked the same. The bills, the sink, the narrow window. She took off her coat and hung it on the chair. Then she stood there, in the middle of the room, the sound of rain beginning to tap softly against the glass. Thursday. She didn't say it out loud, didn't write it down. But it stayed with her. Not as a plan, not as a decision. Just something that hadn't been closed, and that more than anything was enough to keep her from dismissing it entirely. Evelyn didn't decide right away. Wednesday passed in the same quiet rhythm as the days before it, but with something faint beneath it. Not urgency, not anticipation, just a subtle awareness that Thursday was approaching, whether she chose to acknowledge it or not. That night, she pulled her coat from the chair and checked the pockets again. Keys, wallet, enough cash for a bus ticket. She stood there a moment, then reached for the small wooden box on the counter. She didn't open it this time, just rested her hand on the lid. Then she turned away. The bus left just after sunrise. The station was small, 2 benches, a vending machine that hummed louder than it should, and a glass window where a tired clerk slid tickets through a narrow opening without looking up. Evelyn bought hers in cash. No questions asked. The ride was long. Pennsylvania faded into Ohio, then Indiana, then the outskirts of Chicago. The land shifted slowly, fields giving way to industrial blocks, then highways, then buildings stacked closer together, taller, louder. Evelyn sat by the window, hands folded in her lap, watching it all pass without reaction. She didn't sleep. She didn't read. She simply observed. By the time the bus pulled into the terminal, the sky had cleared. The air felt different here, sharper, faster somehow, as if everything moved with a purpose she had stepped out of long ago. The law office stood on a street lined with glass and polished stone, the kind of place where every surface reflected something: light, movement, status. Evelyn paused outside for a moment, not out of hesitation, just to take it in. Then she stepped inside. The lobby was quiet, carpeted, the air conditioned to a degree that felt intentional. A receptionist looked up briefly, then back down at her screen. "Name?" she asked. "Evelyn Mercer." The woman nodded once and made a call. 23rd floor. "They're expecting you." Evelyn took the elevator alone. The ride was smooth, silent. The numbers lit up one by one without pause. When the doors opened, a man was already waiting. Aaron Delaney. He looked much like he sounded, mid-50s, composed, dressed in a dark suit that fit without drawing attention to itself. His expression was neutral, but not cold. "Ms. Mercer," he said, extending a hand. Evelyn shook it briefly. "Mr. Delaney, this way." He led her down a corridor lined with framed artwork she didn't stop to examine. The floor beneath them was soft, their footsteps barely audible. At the end of the hall, a set of double doors stood partially open. Inside, a long table, 3 chairs already occupied. Evelyn recognized her immediately. Lila Mercer. She sat with her back straight, hands folded neatly in front of her. Her hair was pulled back, her posture exact, her presence composed in a way that felt practiced rather than natural. She wore black, though not in mourning, more like a statement. Beside her sat a man Evelyn didn't know, likely another attorney. Neither of them stood when she entered. Neither of them spoke. Evelyn didn't expect them to. She took the empty chair across the table and sat down, placing her worn handbag on her lap. Aaron Delaney moved to the head of the table, opening a folder that had been placed there in advance. Papers were arranged neatly inside, each one aligned with care. "We'll begin," he said. His voice carried evenly through the room. What followed moved with a steady rhythm. Properties, accounts, investments, each item read aloud, each one assigned. The language was formal, precise, detached. Evelyn listened without interruption. A house in Lake Forest, transferred to Lila, a portfolio of commercial holdings. Transferred to Lila. Liquid assets, trusts, securities. All transferred. Lila's expression didn't change, but there was something in the way she shifted slightly in her seat. Subtle, controlled, like someone settling into something that had always been meant for them. Evelyn sat still. Her hands rested lightly on her bag, her gaze steady. She didn't look at Lila, didn't look at the other attorney. She watched Delaney, watched the way he turned each page with care, watched the slight pause before the final document. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but she saw it. And finally, Delaney said, his voice unchanged, "To my former wife, Evelyn Mercer." The room seemed to tighten, though no one moved. Delaney reached into his folder and withdrew a single item, not a document. A bill. He placed it carefully on the table in front of her. A $1 bill. New, crisp. Unfolded. Evelyn looked at it. She didn't reach for it right away. Didn't speak. The silence stretched, just long enough to be felt. Across from her, Lila exhaled softly through her nose. Not quite a laugh, not quite anything at all. Evelyn's eyes remained on the bill. Something about it didn't sit right. Not the amount. That part made sense. Victor had always preferred precision over generosity. No. It was something else. She leaned forward slightly, just enough to bring it closer. The paper was too clean, too untouched. There was a faint line near the edge, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. A crease, not from folding, from pressure, deliberate. Evelyn's fingers hovered above it for a moment before she picked it up. The texture was firm, unhandled. She turned it once, then again. Not searching, observing. She slipped it between her fingers, feeling the edges. Across the table, Lila shifted again, this time more noticeably. "Is there something unclear?" she asked, her voice cool, measured. Evelyn looked up. For the first time since entering the room, her eyes met Lila's. There was no anger there, no bitterness, just a quiet, steady awareness. "No," Evelyn said. Her voice was calm. Nothing unclear. She folded the bill once, precisely, along the faint line she had noticed, and placed it into her handbag. Then she closed the clasp. Aaron Delaney nodded once as if confirming something unspoken. "That concludes the reading," he said. Chairs shifted. Papers were gathered. The room began to loosen, the tension dissolving into quiet movement. Evelyn stood. She didn't rush, didn't linger. She adjusted her coat slightly and turned toward the door. Behind her, Lila spoke again. Some people never knew how to value what they had. The words were soft, almost conversational. Evelyn paused, just for a second, then she continued walking, out into the hallway, past the framed artwork, back toward the elevator. The doors closed behind her with a soft, final sound. Inside the elevator, she stood alone again. The city stretched below as the numbers began to descend. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished metal walls. Unchanged. The handbag rested at her side. Inside it, the folded dollar bill sank quietly. Not heavy, not meaningful, not yet, but not empty either. And as the elevator continued its slow descent, Evelyn found herself thinking, not about what she had been given, but about what exactly had just been placed in her hands. The doors opened onto the lobby. People moved past her without looking, shoes clicking against polished floors, phones held close to faces, voices low, efficient, already somewhere else. Evelyn stepped outside. The air hit her differently now, colder than before, though the temperature hadn't changed. She stood there for a moment, the noise of the city pressing in, cars, horns, fragments of conversation carried by the wind. Her hand moved to her bag. She didn't take the bill out. Not yet. The bus ride home felt longer, or maybe quieter. She sat by the window again, but this time her gaze didn't follow the landscape the same way. It drifted inward, returning again and again to the weight, or lack of weight, of what she carried. $1. That was all. But Victor Mercer had never done anything without intention. Not in business, not in life, and certainly not in something as final as this. By the time she reached her town, the sky had already dimmed. The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting uneven pools of yellow across the pavement. She walked the familiar route back to the duplex. Same buildings, same silence, but something in her pace had shifted, slightly slower, more deliberate. Inside, the kitchen greeted her exactly as she had left it. The bills. The narrow window. The faint smell of coffee that had long gone cold. Evelyn placed her bag on the table and stood there for a moment, looking at it. Then she opened it. The dollar bill was where she had put it, folded once, clean and exact. She took it out and laid it flat on the table. The overhead light caught its surface, revealing details she hadn't noticed before, or maybe details she hadn't allowed herself to notice. She pulled a chair closer and sat. Her hands rested on either side of the bill, not touching it, just framing it. She leaned in slightly. The paper was new, too new. It hadn't passed through hands the way money usually did. No softening at the edges, no faint discoloration from use. She turned it over. The serial number caught her eye. She read it once, then again. Something about the sequence felt intentional, not random. Her brow tightened slightly. Without thinking, she stood and crossed the room to the wooden box. She opened it, pulling out the old ledgers she had reviewed the night before. She brought them back to the table and set them down beside the bill. The pages smelled faintly of paper and dust. She flipped through them carefully, scanning rows of numbers she knew almost by heart. Victor had always been particular about certain things. Patterns, markers, ways of organizing information that made sense to him, even when they weren't obvious to anyone else. She had learned them over time, not because he explained them, because she paid attention. Evelyn found one of the older entries, years back, early in the business when cash flow had been tight and every transaction mattered. There. A note in the margin. Small, easy to miss. A sequence of numbers written in pencil, slightly darker than the printed ink around it. She leaned closer, compared it to the bill. The structure wasn't identical, but the rhythm was. A grouping, a break, another grouping. Her fingers moved to the bill again, tracing the serial number slowly. Victor used to do this. Mark things. Not with words, with patterns. Subtle enough that most people would overlook them. Clear enough that someone who knew what to look for could follow. Evelyn sat back. The room felt different now. Not larger, not smaller, just sharper. The bill wasn't an insult. Or at least, not only that. It was something else. A point. A beginning. She reached for a pen and a scrap of paper from the drawer. Slowly, she wrote down the serial number. Then she wrote it again, spacing it differently, breaking it apart. Looking at it from another angle. The numbers didn't form anything obvious at first. No date, no code she could immediately recognize, but the repetition was there. A pattern hiding inside the sequence. She tapped the pen lightly against the table. Once, twice, then she stopped. There was something else. The crease. She picked up the bill again, unfolding it fully this time. The line she had noticed at the law office ran along one edge, not perfectly straight, but deliberate enough to suggest pressure had been applied. Not folded. Pressed, as if it had been held against something. She tilted the bill toward the light. For a second, nothing. Then, a faint indentation. So slight she might have missed it if she hadn't been looking. A line. Not printed. Pressed into the paper. Her breath slowed. Evelyn reached for the magnifying glass she kept in the drawer, a leftover from years of reviewing fine print and contracts that tried to hide important details in small type. She held it over the bill. The indentation became clearer. Not a full mark, just part of one. A number, or the edge of one. She set the glass down carefully. Victor didn't leave things unfinished. If this was a mark, it led somewhere. The question was, where? Evelyn folded the bill again, this time more carefully, aligning it along the crease she had found. Then she placed it back on the table, not inside the bag, not inside the box. Here, where she could see it. She leaned back in her chair. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, brushing against the side of the building. The sound was soft, steady. Her eyes returned to the bill. $1. That was what the room had seen, what Lila had expected her to see, what the lawyer had presented. But that wasn't what this was. Not entirely. Evelyn reached for her coat, draped over the chair, and slipped it on again. She didn't check the time, didn't question the decision. She simply moved. The kitchen light stayed on behind her as she stepped out into the night air. The street was quiet, the same as always. But now, for the first time in a long while, Evelyn Mercer wasn't just moving through her life. She was following something. And whatever it was, it had already begun. The street outside her duplex was empty. A single streetlight flickered near the corner, casting a dull, uneven glow across the cracked pavement. Evelyn stood there for a moment, her coat pulled close, the night air pressing lightly against her face. She didn't have a plan. Not fully. But she had something better. A direction. She turned and started walking. The town looked different at night. Quieter. Less defined. The buildings seemed to blur at the edges, their details softened by shadow. But Evelyn didn't need to see everything clearly. She knew where she was going. The bank branch sat 3 blocks past the old diner, tucked between a pharmacy and a vacant storefront that still had faded posters taped to the inside of its windows. It was closed, of course. Lights off, doors locked. A small security camera mounted above the entrance, angled slightly downward. Evelyn stopped across the street. She didn't approach right away. Instead, she studied it. The layout, the signage, the way the glass reflected the streetlight behind her. Years ago, she had stood inside that building. Not this exact branch, but one like it. Same structure, same corporate layout. She could still picture the desk where they had sat, the loan officer flipping through documents, nodding at projections that had only made sense because she had made them make sense. Victor had done the talking. She had done the thinking. Evelyn crossed the street slowly. She stopped just short of the door and looked at the sign. Regional Federal Bank. She read it once, then again. The serial number on the bill ran through her mind. Not the full sequence, just the rhythm, the spacing. She reached into her pocket and pulled the folded dollar out, holding it under the faint light. Her fingers traced the numbers again. Something about them. A location. Not exact, but tied. Banks didn't just print money randomly. Distribution followed routes, branches, systems. If Victor had chosen this bill, then it had come from somewhere specific. Evelyn slid the bill back into her pocket and turned away. Standing here wouldn't give her answers. Morning would. She returned at opening. The same street, the same door. But now the lights were on inside, and a few people stood in line, waiting. Evelyn stepped in quietly. The air smelled faintly of paper and carpet cleaner. A soft hum of conversation filled the space. She took her place at the end of the line. No rush, no impatience. When her turn came, she stepped forward to the counter. The teller was young, maybe late 20s, efficient, polite in a practiced way. "How can I help you?" he asked. Evelyn placed the dollar bill on the counter. "I have a question about this," she said. He glanced at it briefly. "Is there an issue with it?" "No," she said. "I'd just like to know where it came from." He hesitated. "Ma'am, currency circulates." "I know how currency works," Evelyn said gently, not interrupting him so much as redirecting him. Her tone wasn't sharp, just steady. He paused, then leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "There's not much we can track at the branch level," he said. "But sometimes newer bills are distributed in batches. If it's recent, it may have been part of a shipment tied to a regional center." Evelyn nodded. "That's what I thought." She slid the bill back toward herself. "Would that information be recorded somewhere?" "Possibly," he said. "Depends on how detailed you're looking to get. You might need to speak with someone in records or operations." "Where would I find that?" He glanced toward the back office, then back at her. "There's a regional archive office about an hour from here," he said. "They handle older transaction logs, distribution records, things like that." "Do you have an address?" He hesitated again, then reached for a small slip of paper, scribbling something down. "Try this," he said, sliding it toward her. "No guarantees." Evelyn took it. "Thank you." She turned and walked out. The building sat farther out than she expected. Past the edges of town, past the places people still used. The road narrowed as she drove, the pavement giving way to stretches of patched asphalt and gravel. Trees lined both sides, their branches reaching inward just enough to cast shifting shadows across the windshield. The archive office wasn't much to look at. A low structure, brick, no signage beyond a small plaque near the door. She parked and stepped out. The air here was quieter. Not empty, just still. Inside, the space was dimmer than she expected. Rows of filing cabinets, shelves stacked with boxes labeled in careful, faded handwriting. An older man sat behind a desk near the back, reading something through a pair of glasses that had slipped slightly down his nose. He looked up as she approached. "Yes?" Evelyn held out the slip of paper. "I was told you might be able to help me locate distribution records." He took the paper, glanced at it, then at her. "What kind of records?" She reached into her pocket and unfolded the dollar bill. "This one." He studied it for a moment. "Currency?" "Yes." He leaned back slightly. "That's a long trail," he said. "Most people don't follow it." "I'm not most people." He watched her for a second longer, then nodded once. "All right." He stood, moving slowly but with purpose, and walked toward a set of cabinets near the far wall. "Newer bills are easier," he said over his shoulder. "Less time to get lost." Evelyn followed, her steps quiet against the floor. He pulled open a drawer, flipping through folders with practiced ease. "Serial numbers give you a range," he continued. "From there, we track batches, shipments, where they were sent first." He stopped, pulled a file, set it on the table beside them. Evelyn leaned in. The paper inside was dense with numbers, codes, locations. But she didn't feel overwhelmed. This was familiar ground. She scanned the columns quickly, her eyes adjusting to the structure, finding patterns where others might see only data. There. A match. The sequence aligned with a shipment sent years ago. Not recent, not local. Her finger traced the line. Destination. A branch tied to a land acquisition project. Location code listed just beneath it. A rural county. She recognized the name, not immediately, but faintly, like something heard once and stored away. Victor had taken her there, years ago. Early days. A deal that hadn't seemed important at the time. A piece of land that didn't connect to anything else they were building. She looked at the date. It lined up. Evelyn straightened slightly. "Can I get a copy of this?" she asked. The man nodded. "Give me a minute." As he stepped away, she stood there, looking at the file. The numbers, the location, the memory forming slowly around it. This wasn't random. None of it was. Victor had chosen that bill. From that batch. From that place. Evelyn folded the paper carefully when it was handed back to her. She thanked the man and walked out into the quiet air. The car sat where she had left it, dust settling lightly along the edges. She stood beside it for a moment, the paper in her hand, the dollar bill tucked safely back in her pocket. Then she opened the door, got in, and turned the key. The engine started with a low hum. Evelyn Mercer didn't hesitate. She already knew where she was going next. And this time, she wasn't looking back. The road stretched ahead in long, quiet lines. Evelyn drove without music, without distraction. The paper with the location code rested on the passenger seat, held in place by the weight of her handbag. She didn't need to keep checking it. The direction had settled in her mind already. The highway gave way to smaller roads, then narrower ones, the kind that curved more than they should, winding through stretches of land that seemed untouched by anything recent. Fields appeared, then disappeared behind lines of trees. Old fences leaned at uneven angles. Mailboxes stood alone at the ends of long gravel driveways. She recognized it slowly. Not as a place she had memorized, but as a place she had once passed through without understanding why it mattered. Victor had driven them out here years ago. No explanation. Just a day trip that hadn't led to anything obvious. No deal. No follow-up. No mention afterward. At the time, she had filed it away as one of his many unfinished ideas. Now it felt different. Evelyn turned onto a smaller road, the tires shifting slightly as the surface changed from pavement to packed dirt. The trees closed in closer here, their branches forming a loose canopy overhead, filtering the light into uneven patches across the windshield. The air felt cooler, quieter. She drove another mile before she saw it. A gate. Iron. Tall enough to make a statement without drawing attention to itself. It stood between two stone pillars that had aged naturally, not recently built, not newly restored. There was no sign, no name, no indication of ownership, just the gate. Evelyn slowed the car and pulled over to the side of the road. The engine idled for a moment before she turned it off. Silence followed, not the kind she was used to in town, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional sound of movement. This was deeper, more complete. She stepped out of the car. The gravel shifted under her shoes as she walked toward the gate. Up close, the ironwork was detailed but restrained. No decoration, just structure, solid, intentional. Locked. Of course it was. Evelyn didn't reach for it. Instead, she stepped back, looked around. The road behind her was empty. No passing cars, no houses in sight, just trees and the faint movement of wind through leaves. She walked along the edge of the property line, her eyes scanning the perimeter. Victor had never relied on a single point of entry. Not in business. Not anywhere else. She moved slowly, not rushing, not forcing anything, just observing. 10 yards. 20, then there. A break in the trees, not wide, not obvious, but enough. Evelyn stepped off the main path and into the brush, pushing past a few low branches. The ground dipped slightly, then leveled out again. A narrow track, barely worn, curved away from the road. Not maintained, but used. She followed it. Each step careful, deliberate. The path opened gradually, the trees thinning just enough to reveal a stretch of land beyond. And then she saw it. The house. It didn't rise suddenly. It revealed itself in pieces. First the edge of the roofline, dark against the sky. Then the shape of the structure beneath it. Stone. Wood. Large but not overwhelming. Designed to exist rather than impress. Evelyn stopped. Just for a moment. The house sat back from the tree line, surrounded by open ground that had been kept, not wild, but not manicured either. There was a sense of care here, but not display. She stepped forward. The air felt different as she moved closer. Still quiet, but with a kind of presence to it, as if the place had been waiting without needing to announce itself. No cars, no visible movement, but not abandoned. She could tell that immediately. The windows were clean. The structure held its shape. Nothing sagged, nothing looked neglected. Someone had been here, or still was. Evelyn approached the side of the house first, not the front. Her steps slowed as she neared the building, her eyes moving across details automatically. The grain of the wood along the exterior, the way the stone had been fitted, tight, precise, no shortcuts. Victor hadn't built this carelessly. She moved toward one of the windows and looked inside. A room. Furnished, not staged. A chair near the far wall. A table with a single object resting on it. She couldn't make out what it was from this angle. A shelf lined with books. Dust-free, used. Evelyn stepped back. Someone was maintaining this place, which meant she wasn't alone. "Can I help you?" The voice came from behind her. Not loud, not aggressive, just present. Evelyn turned. A woman stood a short distance away, near the edge of the tree line. Late 60s, maybe older. Her posture was straight, her expression steady. She wore a simple coat, hands resting loosely at her sides. No alarm, no surprise, as if Evelyn's presence had already been accounted for. "I was looking for the entrance," Evelyn said. The woman studied her for a moment. Not her face, not her clothes, something deeper. "You didn't use the gate," she said. "It was locked." A slight nod. "Most people stop there. I'm not most people." The woman's gaze shifted slightly, as if confirming something. "That much is clear." A pause. The air between them settled into something quiet, but not uncomfortable. Evelyn reached into her pocket and unfolded the dollar bill. She held it up, not as an offering, not as proof, just as a fact. "I was given this," she said, "at a will reading." The woman's eyes moved to the bill, then back to Evelyn. "Victor Mercer," Evelyn added. Another pause. Longer this time. The woman stepped forward. Not quickly. Just enough to close the distance slightly. "Come with me," she said. No question. No hesitation. Evelyn didn't ask anything else. She followed. They walked along the side of the house and then around toward the front. The path was more defined here, the ground leveled, the steps leading up to the entrance clean and solid. The front door opened before they reached it. Evelyn noticed that. No visible handle turned, no movement from within. Just open. She didn't comment. Inside, the air was cool and still. The space opened into a wide entryway, high ceilings, natural light filtering in from windows placed with intention rather than symmetry. It wasn't empty, but it wasn't full either. Everything had a place. Nothing felt temporary. Evelyn stepped inside. Her shoes made a soft sound against the floor. She looked around slowly. Not overwhelmed, not impressed, just aware. "This property has been maintained under private trust for some time," the woman said, her voice calm, measured. Evelyn turned toward her. "Whose trust?" The woman met her gaze directly. "That depends on who's asking." Evelyn held her ground. "I am." Another pause. Then, the slightest shift in the woman's expression. Not surprise. Recognition. "Then we should sit down," she said. Evelyn didn't move right away. Her eyes drifted once more across the room. The walls. The space. The quiet. This house had never been mentioned. Not in all the years she had spent beside Victor. Not once. And yet, here it was. Waiting. Not for anyone. For her. Evelyn stepped forward and crossed the threshold fully. Whatever this place was, she was already inside it. The door closed behind her with a soft, final sound. Evelyn stood in the entryway, letting her eyes adjust, not to the light, but to the space itself. It didn't feel like a house that had been left behind. It felt occupied. Not in the sense of people moving through it, but in the way everything held its position, as if it had been waiting without shifting. "Through here," the woman said. Evelyn followed her into a larger room just beyond the entryway. It opened wide with tall windows stretching along one wall. The glass looked out over a slope of land that rolled gently downward into a line of trees. No road, no neighboring house, just distance. A table sat near the center of the room, not decorative, functional. Papers rested on it, neatly stacked, aligned. Evelyn noticed that immediately. The order, the precision. She moved toward it without being told. The woman remained a few steps back, watching. Evelyn reached the table and paused, her hand hovering just above the top document. She didn't touch it yet. "Who maintains this place?" she asked. "I do," the woman said. Evelyn glanced over her shoulder. For how long? Long enough. That wasn't an answer. But it wasn't meant to be. Evelyn turned back to the table. Her fingers lowered onto the paper. The first document was a financial record. Not recent. Years old. She scanned it quickly, her eyes moving across the numbers, the formatting, the structure. Familiar. Not just in style, in method. Victor's method. She flipped to the next page. Another set of records. Different accounts, different names, but the same underlying pattern. Funds moved, redirected, layered, not hidden, not exactly, just placed where they wouldn't be seen unless someone knew where to look. Evelyn's brow tightened slightly. She picked up another sheet, then another, each one connected, not randomly, deliberately. She began to piece it together, not line by line, but in structure. Victor hadn't simply moved money, he had reorganized it, shifted assets out of visible holdings into something else, something quieter, something that didn't appear in the documents she had signed during the divorce. Evelyn stepped back slightly, her eyes moving across the table as if it were a map. "This wasn't done all at once," she said. "No," the woman replied. "It wasn't." "Years," Evelyn continued, more to herself than to anyone else. "This took years." She reached for a different stack. Older papers, edges slightly worn. Property records, deeds, transfer documents. She scanned the names, entities she didn't recognize. Then she looked closer. The addresses, the locations. Patterns again. Each one tied to a different holding, a different asset, but all of them leading back here. This place. Evelyn exhaled slowly. "He built this separately," she said. "Yes." "Before the divorce?" "Yes." Evelyn's fingers pressed lightly against the paper. He knew. It wasn't a question. The woman didn't answer right away. Then, he knew enough. Evelyn nodded once. That was all Victor ever needed. Enough. She moved around the table, pulling another set of documents toward her. These were different. Handwritten notes mixed in with printed records. Notations in the margins. Calculations worked out step by step. She recognized the handwriting instantly. tighter than before, more compressed, but still his. She read a line, then another. Dates, adjustments, corrections, not just movements of money. Revisions, as if he had been fixing something. Evelyn frowned slightly. This wasn't just concealment. It was recalibration. She flipped to another page. A diagram. Rough, but clear. Lines connecting entities, properties, accounts. A structure. Layered, protected. Not illegal, not overtly. Just complex enough to exist without being obvious. Evelyn leaned closer. Her eyes moved faster now, connecting points, filling in gaps. She wasn't being told anything. She was seeing it, understanding it, piece by piece. He wasn't just hiding assets, she said. No, the woman replied quietly. Evelyn straightened. He was separating them. Yes. From the business. Yes. From the divorce. A pause. Then, yes. Evelyn turned, her gaze steady. Why? The woman met her eyes. That's not something I was told to explain. Evelyn held the look for a moment longer, then nodded. She didn't need the explanation. Not fully. Not yet. She turned back to the table. Another document caught her attention. Smaller, simpler. A legal page. She picked it up. The language was precise but less dense than the divorce papers she had read before. It outlined conditions tied to the trust holding the property. Her eyes moved slowly across the lines, then stopped. She read it again, more carefully this time. A clause, specific, clear. The trust remained inactive until a designated condition was met. And that condition, Evelyn's hand tightened slightly around the page. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the dollar bill. Unfolded it, placed it beside the document. The crease, the serial number, the timing, her presence at the will reading, her acceptance of the bill. Evelyn exhaled, softly. He set this up so I would have to follow it, she said. The woman didn't respond. She didn't need to. Evelyn's eyes remained on the document. This doesn't transfer automatically, she continued. It requires confirmation. Yes. And I'm the only one who can provide it. Yes. Evelyn looked up. Why me? The question hung in the air. Not emotional, not accusatory, just direct. The woman considered her for a moment, then said, Because you're the only one who would understand what you're looking at. Evelyn held her gaze. There was no flattery in the statement, no exaggeration, just fact. She looked back down at the table, at the documents, at the structure Victor had built quietly, piece by piece, outside the life they had shared. This house, this land, all of it tied together through decisions she hadn't been part of. And yet, somehow, still connected to her. Not through sentiment, not through memory, through design. Evelyn set the paper down carefully. Her movement slowed again, not from uncertainty, from clarity. She walked toward the window. The land stretched out in front of her, unchanged, untouched. No signs of the life she had lived, no reminders of what had been taken, just space. Still, unclaimed. Behind her, the table remained. The documents, the answers, or at least the shape of them. Evelyn stood there for a long moment. Then she spoke. "He didn't leave this to me," she said. The woman remained silent. Evelyn turned slightly, her eyes steady. "He built it so I would find it, and that, more than anything else, changed what it meant." Evelyn stood by the window, the glass cool beneath her fingertips, looking out at land that had never once been offered to her, and yet had always been meant for her to find. Not given, not handed over, found. That was the part she hadn't understood all those years ago, sitting at a different table, signing papers she thought were final. Victor hadn't trusted anyone with this, not his lawyers, not his second wife, not the system he had built his name on. He had trusted a pattern, a habit, a way of thinking that only one person ever bothered to learn. Her. And in the end, he hadn't left her something simple, something clean, something easy to accept or reject. He left her a path. A quiet, deliberate trail that required patience, memory, and a willingness to look closer than anyone else would. Most people would have walked away from a single dollar. Most people would have believed that was all there was. Evelyn didn't. Not because she hoped for more. Because she recognized him. Not the man he became, but the one who built things in silence, who hid meaning in places no one thought to check. She reached into her pocket and unfolded the bill again. It felt different now. Not lighter, not heavier. Just understood. Outside, the land stretched wide and still, untouched by anything that had come before it. No voices, no demands, no expectations, just space. Evelyn let her hand fall to her side. For the first time in years, nothing was being taken from her, nothing was being decided without her, nothing was closing in. She stepped back from the window, turning slowly toward the room behind her, the table, the papers, the quiet weight of something that no longer belonged to the past. And for a moment, she didn't think about what she had lost, or even what she had found. She thought about how close she had come, to never knowing it was there at all. And how many people, just like her, had once been handed something small, something final, and believed it. So tell me, if the last thing someone left you looked like nothing, would you know when it wasn't?